Pete, welcome to the Sharpen podcast. I think we could chat all morning long, but I'll get right to it and welcome you officially.
Great. It is great to be here.
Well, great to have you. I told you before when we were getting started here that I had heard a series or a Bible study, and you were one of the folks a part of that, and you said a Kansas farm boy, and I said, "Oh, I gotta have a Kansas farm boy to connect with the Kentucky farm girl." But why don't you tell us, for those that are meeting you for the first time, a little bit about who you are?
Yes, happy to do that. As you stated, I'm a farm kid, and I think that really had unbelievable impact on me. As I look back, and not to make this trite, but I think it was probably really a faith, family, friends, and freedom environment that I was raised in. Mm-hmm. My parents were deep Christians. Their faith was great. They shared that with me. They were very generous people, just the way they lived. I came to understand living and walking by faith. And of course, if you're a farmer, your entire livelihood is about faith, because really it's built on the weather, and so many things are so uncontrollable. So that was really a blessing. And then family, we were very close. We did lots of great things together. We were not a wealthy family. We're very middle class, maybe even lower middle class, but we never suffered want in anything. And my parents gave us music lessons. They took us on vacations. I think all these things that really impact people. And then, friends. I grew up in small high school. My graduating class was a little over 100. So I had great friends. Yeah. We didn't know the kind of the craziness that I think we're experiencing today in some sense. And so that was really good. Mm-hmm. And then last, freedom. Just, my parents they taught me about my great-grandparents who immigrated from Germany, who left because the government came in and took their land, took their houses, and the only place they could really figure out where to go was Kansas in the United States. Came through Ellis Island. They got on a railroad. They literally rode from New York to Kansas in a boxcar. The railroad gave them the boxcar to live in for a couple of years. And then they started this whole life of freedom, and I'm enjoying it today. So very, very rich experience. As I've gotten older, it's interesting. I think one of the things I would really encourage your listeners to think about is mentors. I have two mentors. They're both they're both in their 90s. Both of them have mentored me for 40 or 45 years. And I've not made a major decision in life without asking them. Mm-hmm. And one of them is a real student of just life. And he has taught me that 0 to 25 is learning, 25 to 50 is doing, 50 to 75 is teaching, or you should begin to teach, and 75 on is finishing up and finishing well. And as I've looked at that in my life, I can see that very, very clearly. I think part of who I am, I would even break it down into decades. So I think during my 20s, the question I was focused on during my 20s was who am I? Mm-hmm. I was trying to figure out what I was, who was I? So I immediately I left, I got a degree in finance from Kansas University. Okay. Jayhawks.
We have listeners from Kansas, so they'll be real excited. Yeah.
So you have some Kentucky Wildcats that are,
yes.
We have a lot of fun with my Kentucky friends on that. So yes. But I really was searching about, who am I? What am I? What am I really passionate about in life? And then in my 30s, through that time, as I was working, I figured out I went to work for a commercial bank. Got a degree in finance, went to work for a commercial bank. And I really figured out that I was an entrepreneur and probably not a banker. So at the age of 30, I started my own business. And then through the 30s, I think from 30 to 40, literally, I was trying to figure out what I should do in life. I was this entrepreneur. We started a little investment banking company. So I did that through my 30s. And then at 40, I think I really asked the really serious question in life is, why did God put me on the face of this earth? So I started with who I was, then what should I do? And then why am I here? And I would really encourage your young listeners. I had that reversed. We worry about our platform first, what we are doing versus what we should, why are we here? And so at the age of 40, I woke up and had a tumultuous time, but I really came to understand as a Christian that we can't have a bifurcated life. It's not business here and my Christian life here, but they're really one and the same. And how do I navigate that? So, yeah, I think I thought my platform was my purpose, and that created some issues for me. The person I'm trying to be, I think there's probably, I talk about 5 things that I'm always working on trying to becoming. One of those is just to work diligently. So work becomes a curse one way or another. We don't have it, so we don't have material provisions, or we have work and then we worship our work. But I think we should really view work as worship. And it should be a blessing for us, and it's something we should really do. So I think working diligently is really critically. The second thing I'm trying to do is live simply. The one thing I've learned after 68 years is that I've made my life too complicated. If we can go through life with a light backpack, I think you can go farther and faster.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thirdly, taking risk. And I would really encourage the generation of folks that listen to your podcast. I want to make sure that you don't be afraid of taking risk, but it's not some cavalier roll of the Las Vegas style roll of the dice, but it's a prayed up, planned up, prepared up way to view life. So risk wisely, take some risks. I heard this a few years ago. I heard they'd surveyed a bunch of folks in in a nursing home, and they asked them if there was one thing that you could change. And 75% of them said, I wish I would have taken more risk in life. So work diligently, live simply, risk wisely. The fourth thing for me is to give generously. I think we need to be really generous people. And the last thing I would try to do is to really love unconditionally. So if I could be the perfect person, I would work diligently, live simply, risk wisely, give generously, and really love unconditionally.
Man, beautifully said. Thank you for sharing even a little bit of your background story there, and your reflection too on the seasons of life and what you're learning or doing or teaching or finishing well. I think it really speaks to our audience too. You mentioned this as one of your 5 values or what you're working toward, but just that piece of generosity. And that's what stood out to me. I was watching this series, and you talked about generosity and where that stems from, and even for you professionally, personally, like life experiences and learning. So why don't you just start there, Pete, and tell us a little bit about like what that means to you, and especially as you talk about work as worship. Tell us about how you think about generosity in your work and any experiences that you've had that have really molded that.
Yes. So as I shared, I grew up in a Christian family that was very generous. And I think in some sense that built generosity into my DNA.
Sure.
Fortunately, when I came to the business world and I got in the business world, I bifurcated, as I said, my business life from my Christian life. And so consequently, I joke about the fact I wanted to be a 90-10 guy. I wanted to make a lot of money so that my 10% to God would be a big number. Well, you could imagine what I was going to do with the 90%, right?
Right.
And as I went through my 30s and I really became passionate about my platform and being successful, I came to the end of my 30s at about 40 years of age. We had made an acquisition of a business that was in trouble, and it was actually a bank, and I was cleaning this bank up, and I was actually sued by one of the customers of the bank. And it was the reason he sued me is the guy that owned the bank before me had violated a number of lending rules. And so consequently, he was trying to get out of repaying a $3 million loan. Anyway, he sued me for a lot of money. I can tell you through that whole experience, I really came to being forced to answer the why question. Why do I exist? Lord, I've done all this stuff. I've been generous to you. Don't you understand what I've done for you? And thanks again to these two older mentors. They just sat me down and they worked me through for a month or two. They said, Pete, we think you really view life as an owner instead of a steward. You've got your 90% and you've got your 10%, but it's really 0 and 100. And when I understood that, just within a matter of a few days, my life changed. It was just like the scales had fallen off my eyes and I wanted to do business differently. Mm-hmm. So I began at that point in time to really steward my life and my business much differently. Unfortunately, as time went on over the years and we began to give more money, and I like to give more money, I thought that generosity was financial stewardship. I thought it was giving money away. And then 9/11 rolled around and we'd been doing well. We'd been giving, our businesses were great. We'd been giving lots of money away. And we almost went bankrupt after 9/11 because our businesses just stopped. Mm-hmm. At that point in time, I was really upset with God. And again, my mentors came alongside of me and they said, Pete, God doesn't want your money. He wants you. He wants you to give, to steward your life. Okay. And so I began to steward my life differently. And at that point in time, we really changed the way we did business.
So walk us through that. And I love how you're saying we, because I know it's both the team that you're on at work. And I remember from even the video I watched where you talked about your wife. So there were many we's in this conversation. Miss Debbie, right? Do I remember her name? Miss Debbie. So tell us a little bit about, you said, it's like everything changed instantly, but, tell us about on the practical, especially for an audience of young professionals that are maybe hearing this kind of thinking for the first time. Let's get in the practical side of any encouragements you would say there for them too.
Sure. So if we think of stewardship, we often think of money. That's what I do with my money. Okay. But I think we steward our life, and I love to use the acrostic LIFE. L stands for your labor, I stands for your influence, F stands for your financial resources, and E stands for your expertise. So we all have 24 hours a day, so we're all given the same L, the amount of L, the amount of labor time, okay? So we need to look at that. Some of us have different amounts of influence. God has given some of us influence. He's given others financial resources. He's given other expertise. So I think for your young people to really think through what are you passionate about? What are the skills and talents God has given you? It's not, if he's given you the ability to make money, make as much as you can, but steward it well. If he's given you influence, he may just be giving you time. And I really think time is, as we all know, the most expensive one of all of those.
Yeah.
We all just get 24 hours a day. So once I understood this concept of stewarding my life, then it really changed the way I did business. You see, before I think, the world will tell us that the purpose of business is to maximize shareholder value, to maximize your bottom line, your financial bottom line. I really believe, and this was part of this whole stewardship concept and change, that the purpose of business is to be a catalyst for flourishing. Okay. Yeah. And there are three things, and I think really only three things we all need to flourish. One is you need food, clothing, and shelter. We need material provision. We call that economic capital. The second thing we need is deep, authentic relationships. We all know this. If we have a good friend and that relationship gets fractured some way, life isn't as good as it could be.
Yeah.
So we need deep, authentic relations. We call that social capital. And thirdly, we all need a moral code to live by. We need to know the right and wrong of life. And for those of us who are Christ followers, we know that that's really consists of two main things. One is a personal relationship with Jesus. where we're walking day to day with him. And secondly, we really understand the commands and the expectations and the promises that are in God's word. And so if we do that, then my goal as a business owner is really to create flourishing. So then who do I create flourishing for? Well, I have team members, I have employees, I have vendors, and I have customers, and I have some shareholders. So our business model is built around making sure that we, as a team member with us, we are maximizing whatever God-given talents you've been given so that you can use those to help other people. So with that said, it really changed the way we did business.
Wow. I can imagine. Even the life framework, as you're sharing that, you talked about that in terms of business, you talked about that, but I can just imagine for our audience too, Pete, this is such a great place to just press pause and then reflect on each of those four aspects, right, of stewardship, and then to take it then, okay, then what's my role? What's my workplace? So we always say Sharpen is to sharpen young professionals for the workplace and beyond, right? You have a whole life. You're not just a employee, but to think about how this life model fits for all aspects. You mentioned the flourishing piece, and you framed that up. One story, one example that really captivated me in listening was when you talked about the business established there at a prison. And would you tell us a little bit about, tell us about walking through that, what was laid on your heart and your mind to do that, and then tell our audience just so they know what we're talking about in this business.
Yes. So one of the companies we owned, we moved from being a investment banker, a middleman in transactions, to actually starting to buy our own companies, and that was during the 90s. So today we own several manufacturing companies, an energy company, and we're in the education business. So as I looked at those companies, we had a rapidly growing manufacturing company in a relatively small town in Kansas, and we couldn't find enough entry-level manufacturing level labor to really grow that business. Somehow we figured out that there was a local prison in town, and the warden came to us and said, would you be interested in hiring work release inmates? These are inmates that are about ready to leave prison. They're really good guys. They've served their time. They've changed the way they view life, and they'll work for you for a year or two, and then they'll be released from prison and they'll go back out to society. We did that. That lasted 90 days, and I said, I want more of this. So I went back to the warden and I said, can I have more of these guys? This is terrific. He says, I'm out of those guys, but I have 1,200 guys in behind the walls of a maximum security prison. And if you could figure out how to move your business from the outside to the inside behind the walls of this prison, you've got 1,200 guys. And I just said, this is terrific. Now, I would like to say that I did that because I was a good-hearted, good-natured guy, and I really wanted to help these fellows out. I did it probably out of greed because I needed workers. But it was interesting once we moved our business in the prison. And today we have 50,000 square feet and we employ 200 inmates in a maximum security prison. So once I got in there and spent some time with these guys, and it didn't take very long, I'm going to say 90 days, I just realized that they weren't much different than me. Maybe the only difference was they had been caught and I hadn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Being a bit facetious there, but so then that move into the prison, along with this parallel track of me saying, how do we do business different? It just came together perfectly. And that was very low hanging fruit in the prison. So then we began to implement all of these ideas of what we call a high impact business, one that creates economic, social, and spiritual capital. So we moved inside the prison. So today, some of the things we do, let's talk about economic capital for just a minute. If you're an inmate and you work for the state of Kansas, you'll make 50 cents to $1 per day, less than $1 per day. If you work for us, you'll make $9 to $16 an hour. You'll make $80 to $100 a day. So we pay them regular prevailing wages. I never understood the power of a job and the power of a paycheck. I just grown up on a farm, and I thought that was something everybody did. Most of these men that work for us today have never had a job. So when they come in and we put them in a structured environment and they begin to work, as I said, work is worship. Oh my goodness, the great things that happen is amazing. So we give them a job. Now, that $100 a day they earn, the top 25% of that goes back to the state for room and board. So the state makes $25 a day for room and board. Then they pay child support, restitution, all these good things. I had a man come up to him about 3 or 4 months ago, and he was almost weeping. He said, Pete, I'll be leaving in about 30 days. And he said 2 things. I want you to understand, because of this job, I was able to pay off a $12,000 restitution from when I robbed a liquor store. The second thing is, and he handed me a graduation announcement from college for his daughter. He said, I was able to pay for her college education. And it was phenomenal. So we get to hear dozens of stories like that. Just absolutely phenomenal. So economic capital is a huge thing. Social capital. I think the first thing we do, I love the story of the Good Samaritan, because here you have a guy laying in the ditch that was beat up and dying. The religious guys walked by him. They literally walked around him. It says, but here came the Good Samaritan. And I love to think of the Good Samaritan as a business person. He picked him up. He took him to the hotel. He paid for his room. He paid for his needs. So the first thing we do, our philosophy of business, is to provide people a good job so they can have economic capital, number one. Number two, we want to build deep, authentic relationships with them, social capital. We do that by just treating them as human beings. They're murderers, rapists, drug dealers, but we treat them as regular human beings. When you do those 2 things, guess what happens? The doors to spiritual capital fly open. They say, why are you treating me like that? And it's amazing. So socially, social capital, we treat them well, but we have fathering classes. We have every month, we buy them lunch. We bring lunch in from the outside. We have a leadership talk. We do all of these things that tries to prepare them. Personal finance classes. We have 10,000 hours of education online in the prison. They can literally almost get a college degree for free doing some of these things. So that's social capital. Spiritually, we just share Jesus when we can and as we do. In addition to that, we started a seminary inside the prison. We've graduated 8. We've got 23 currently going through. We're in the process of, in fact, it's done except for COVID, but we've built $1 million church inside of the prison. Goodness. Yeah. And so the impact economically, socially, and spiritually, if you think holistically like that, it is a powerful thing.
It is. That's your stories, Pete, of the father paying for college tuition and seminary graduates and college graduates. I mean, I'm sure the stories could go on and on and on. And you talk about in the life values, your sphere of influence, and you think about now where all of those individuals are having influence. It's just remarkable, right? But it would have never began. I have to ask you, you said that, you were like, well, this was a great opportunity for a workforce. And was this one of those things that you called up your 2 mentors and ran by them before it began as well?
Well, I meet with them every month. So I told them, yes. So I told them about this opportunity, and they said, you really need to search that out. But I honestly didn't go in thinking I would create economic, social, and spiritual capital. I needed a workforce. But once we got in there, and then we saw another young man that was in for life. He'd murdered a fella by the time when he was 17 years of age, was in for life, had a life sentence, came to workforce, very quickly bought into our vision. I remember it's probably been 10 years ago. I felt like we weren't really connecting with the inmates as to a vision that they could grab a hold of and really kind of sink their teeth into. So I remember one leadership lunch day, I said, I want to cast a vision for you. And the vision is this: I want to have the best president in the United States of America. They literally laughed at me. They said, that's impossible. That's an oxymoron, best president. But as we began to unwind that, and I told them, I said, we can have the best president if you become the best inmates. My promise to you is I'm here to help you become the best inmate you can become. Well, they grabbed onto that. And so this young man grabbed a hold of it, who was in for life.
Yeah.
Really became a leader, wrote a 40-page manual on how to be the best inmate, began to teach that to other inmates. That got him a parole hearing. He was turned down. 3 years later, he got another hearing and he was released. Wow. Today, he is running a very successful business as an entrepreneur. Mm. So you just never understand how.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, the story, thank you. Those stories that will just, that's just a reminder of not just the business, but as believers, what we know when we have that open hand of whatever it is, our time, our money, our influence, like what God can do with that, right? Because there's an element there where we can plan and we can take risk, and how he will orchestrate it to be all of these stories. I think that as young professionals, a lot of folks are listening, and we've talked about generosity, and we've talked about having mentors. I mean, you've shared with us so much today, but you know, as you think about all of these stories and these experiences in your life framework, I know you have a lot of encouragement, but man, if there's one piece as you reflect back, whether it's not only the work that you've done in business and becoming a model of generosity, or the example of the prison and the flourishing that's going on there, to having mentors. I mean, what's that one nugget? If you could say like, hey, you're in the first 10 years of your career, here's the one thing that today I want you to really, really reflect on.
Yes. So I'm thinking back to my 20s and what was probably the greatest, most impactful thing I did. I would have to say it's probably writing a personal plan.
Okay.
And so I wrote my first personal plan when I was 25. I'd read a book on personal planning, and it absolutely changed my life. So I wrote my first personal mission statement. I wrote down my values. I began to write down what I was passionate about. What did people say that I did well? What did I just like doing? Mm-hmm. And I began to think long-term. I had some BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. Yeah. I just put a few of those down. And then I had some actual things that I wanted to accomplish over the next 12 months. And I look at my BHAGs. One of those was to own my own business. Okay. And then I had 3 or 4 others that I said, there is no way in the world those would happen. All of those have happened. And I think subconsciously, when you put those down and you read those every quarter, I read through my plan, and I just say, should I update it? Am I on track? And I think subconsciously I began to work towards those other big, hairy, audacious goals. And so doing that planning forced me to answer the question, why do I exist? Which I think is your purpose in life. Mm-hmm. The second question is, who am I? Which is what are you really passionate about? And the third question is, what am I to do in life? Which is really your platform. It's your job, it's your career, etc. As I told you, I started with my platform, went to my passion, and wound up answering my purpose. If as a young person, you could reverse that, think about your purpose in life. And as Christians, I think it's very simple, just honor God. Mm. My 3 passions are very general, but I think they work for everyone. And that is to serve people, to be excellent, and to be a good steward of whatever God's given me. Those are my 3 values that drive my passions. Mm. And then last, my platform, I'm a faith-driven entrepreneur.
Well, beautifully said. And we know that I've learned too that you're also a writer. I'm assuming that these surface in some of the writing of what your passions are. Tell us where, we'll include these in show notes, but I'm assuming that these stories and points of reflection you've shared come up in some of that writing, but tell us a little bit about the books that you've written.
Sure. It's called High Impact Life. Mm-hmm. And High Impact Life, love your purpose, live with passion, leverage your platform. And so that's the book. And then there's a workbook that goes with it, which is really called High Impact Habits. And I think there are really 3 habits that you need to do in life. One is your annual plan. The second is your weekly strategy. And your third is daily execution. So I teach people how to write a plan and then think about your week and to think about your day and really to think about your purpose, passion, and platform.
Well, thank you for sharing that. We'll be sure to include that in show notes because to me, it's like, man, there's just a really actionable piece even from today. We've got reflection. We've also got action here. So Pete, we've so enjoyed the time with you. We always ask our guests to answer 2 questions. The first is a favor. We'd love for you to make a shout out to someone or a group of people. You've done that throughout the entire episode, which is fantastic. But we'd love to hear if there's anybody else that comes to mind here.
There's a bunch of them. God, my wife, my family, my management team, and my 2 mentors. So I'm here because of them.
Wonderful. Well, we'd also love to hear from you, a game changer. So it's something that sent you in a different direction. I told you before we started, we've had really powerful conversations, and we've also had really awesome grocery store finds. So full freedom of the spectrum.
Yes. The game changer for me was understanding ownership versus stewardship. When that dawned on me, when that became real, oh my goodness. And here's what's really neat about that. If I'm the owner, I have to worry about all this stuff. If I'm the steward, I'm just saying, Lord, what do you want me to do with the stuff you've given me? So when COVID hits, when a big customer goes away, when my car breaks down, Lord, it's yours. What do you want me to learn from it? And it just puts a whole different perspective on life, and one that I think has probably gotten me through.
And I love that example too, because going back to our farm roots, right? It's an agricultural mindset, right? Of like, I don't own this, I steward it. Among all the risk and all the harvest and all of the ups and downs. So thank you for sharing, Pete. This has been such a good episode.